Welcome to Void of Rules, where nightmares have no boundaries. In this channel, we explore the darkest corners of horror that most dare not enter. Every video takes you deeper into the shadows where forgotten terrors wait. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers by year's end. The void hungers for new souls. And now, let's dive into the void. The ancient sedan's heater struggled against the October chill as Dr. Elise Kettering white-knuckled the steering wheel. Outside her windshield, Montana's wilderness stretched endlessly, the winding mountain road threatening to disappear into swirling mist with each hairpin turn. She glanced at her phone again. No service for the last 4 hours. The device was nothing more than an expensive paperweight now, forcing her to rely on the coffee-stained map and handwritten directions the hiring manager had mailed 3 weeks ago. "You're doing this," she whispered to herself, the words forming small clouds in the car's inadequate warmth. A fresh start, a new beginning. The radio had died an hour back, leaving her alone with thoughts she'd been running from since Philadelphia. In the silence, memories surfaced. The hospital's fluorescent lights, the chief pharmacist's grim expression, the review board's questions that seemed to stretch for days. How could you miss the contraindication? Were you distracted? Do you understand the consequences of your error? Elise shook her head sharply, forcing her attention back to the treacherous road. What happened at Memorial General would stay in Philadelphia. Here, in the middle of nowhere, Montana, no one would know her as that pharmacist whose mistake had cost a life. The road crested yet another ridge, and a valley suddenly opened below, nestled between towering pines and jagged mountain faces. Pine Bend wasn't on most maps, population barely 300 according to the weathered sign she'd passed 20 minutes back. From this height she could see the entire town, a cluster of buildings huddled around what appeared to be a single main street, smoke curling from chimneys, and beyond that, endless forest pressing in from all sides like a dark tide. After 3 years working at Memorial General's bustling pharmacy in Philadelphia, the silence felt alien. No car horns, no ambulance sirens, no overhead announcements calling code blues or trauma teams, just the occasional whisper of wind through towering pines that crowded against the narrow road like silent sentinels. Perfect for starting over, she thought, adjusting her rearview mirror. The reflection showed dark circles under her eyes, remnants of sleepless nights following the mistake. The woman's face flashed in her memory. Mrs. Abernathy, 56, whose medication interaction had gone unnoticed during a particularly chaotic shift. 2 drug orders, both technically correct in isolation, fatally incompatible when combined. By the time the error was caught, cardiac arrest had already caused irreversible damage. Elise's fingers trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Her therapist had suggested a change of scenery after the resulting breakdown, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the inability to look at another prescription without triple-checking it until patients complained about wait times. Rural Montana certainly qualified as a change. A place where nobody knew about the wrongful death lawsuit, the board review, or how she'd surrendered her Philadelphia license while maintaining her national certification. Breathe, she reminded herself. Dr. Hammerschmidt's voice echoed in her mind. One day at a time, you're still a good pharmacist, Elise. One mistake doesn't define you. But it did, didn't it? Mrs. Abernathy would never go home to her grandchildren. Her husband's tearful testimony at the review hearing had made that painfully clear. Elise descended into the valley as golden hour light bathed everything in amber hues. The road finally opened to reveal Pine Bend in its entirety, a collection of weathered buildings huddled around a single main street that couldn't have stretched more than 6 blocks. Time seemed to have stopped here sometime in the late 70s. Analog gas pumps stood outside a general store. Hand-painted signs hung from storefronts. And not a single national chain was visible among the small businesses. Slowing to the posted 25 miles per hour, Elise drove past a diner where elderly men in flannel shirts watched her car with undisguised curiosity. Further down, she noted the essential landmarks of small-town America: a hardware store with rusted garden equipment displayed outside, a modest post office with a flagpole, and a sheriff's office with 2 patrol vehicles parked neatly out front. Near the edge of town, Elise finally spotted her destination. Beartooth Pharmacy stood slightly apart from the other buildings, set back from the street with an actual front lawn, unusual for a commercial property. Its Victorian architecture stood incongruous with the surrounding structures, 3 stories of ornate woodwork and gingerbread trim that spoke of a different era. Faded green paint peeled from wooden siding, and wrought iron details adorned windows that reflected the late afternoon sun. A weathered sign swung gently in the breeze, featuring a stylized mountain bearing fangs like a predator. She pulled into the small parking lot, tires crunching on gravel. As she cut the engine, the silence rushed in, a profound, weighted quiet, unlike the temporary lulls of city life. Here, the absence of sound felt like a physical presence, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Gathering her courage and the single suitcase containing everything she hadn't sold or put in storage, Elise approached the pharmacy entrance. A hand-lettered sign in the window announced Beartooth Pharmacy, serving Pine Bend since 1873, alongside faded ads for remedies Elise hadn't seen since pharmacology school. A brass bell jingled as she pushed open the heavy oak door, the sound lingering longer than seemed natural. The interior smelled of antiseptic, cough drops, and something else, earthy and unfamiliar. Like soil after rain mixed with something metallic. Unlike modern pharmacies with their fluorescent lighting and sterile white counters, Beartooth felt almost like a museum piece. Oak shelving lined the walls, holding amber bottles and jars arranged in patterns that seemed deliberately ornamental. A wooden floor worn to a honeyed patina by decades of footsteps creaked beneath her feet. Behind a high counter of polished mahogany stood antique brass scales and mortars, apparently still in use judging by the residue of something green in one of the bowls. "You must be Dr. Kettering." The voice came from behind the counter, where a man in his 60s organised pill bottles with gnarled hands. Conrad Blithe looked exactly as she'd imagined from their phone conversation, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a small ponytail, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a hawk-like nose, and a frame too thin for his height, as though he'd been stretched vertically. He wore a white pharmacist's coat that had yellowed with age, the fabric hanging loosely on his skeletal frame. "Mr. Blithe," Elise extended her hand, summoning her most professional demeanour. "I appreciate the opportunity to join your practice." His handshake was brief, his palm dry as paper, and surprisingly cold despite the warmth of the building. "Call me Conrad. Everyone does." His eyes, pale blue and unnervingly intense, darted to the antique clock on the wall. 4:37, you're early. Good. Not ideal to arrive after dark, not at first. Something in his tone made the statement feel like more than casual small talk. Before Elise could question it, a young woman emerged from between the shelves, carrying a paper bag of medications. She couldn't have been older than 16, with long braided hair and a wary expression that softened when Conrad nodded at her. "All set, Lily. Your grandmother's heart medicine is in there, along with the vitamins she requested." "Thanks, Mr. Blithe." The girl's eyes flicked curiously to Elise before she hurried out, bell jingling in her wake. "Lily Black River," Conrad explained. "Her grandmother raises her since her parents passed in that mining accident up north. Good family." He gestured around the pharmacy. "Welcome to Beartooth. I suspect it's quite different from Memorial General." Elise stiffened. "You know about my previous position?" Conrad's thin lips formed what might have been a smile on someone else. "Small towns run on information, Dr. Kettering. I make it my business to know who I'm bringing to Pine Bend." The comment hung in the air between them. Had Conrad researched her mistake? Did he know about Mrs. Abernathy? Elise swallowed hard, uncertain whether to be defensive or grateful that he'd hired her despite knowing. I reviewed your academic record and certifications, Conrad continued, as if sensing her discomfort. Top of your class at University of Michigan. Specialized training in compounding. We need those skills here. Elise relaxed slightly. I wasn't sure a small-town pharmacy would be interested in compounding. Beartooth isn't your typical small-town pharmacy. Conrad gestured around them. Much of what we do is specialized. Elise followed Conrad's gaze, taking a more careful inventory of her surroundings. The layout was strange. Shelves arranged in patterns that seemed to waste space, forming curved pathways rather than the efficient grid system used in most pharmacies. Herbs and botanicals she couldn't identify filled glass jars along one wall. A narrow staircase of dark wood led to a second floor, and behind the counter stood a heavy door with an ornate iron lock that presumably led to a basement. Most peculiar were the symbols discreetly carved into the support beams, spirals and interlocking circles that looked almost Native American in design. Let me show you around before we lose daylight. Conrad's emphasis on the last words seemed odd, but Elise followed as he gestured towards the back. The pharmacy serves Pine Bend and surrounding mountain communities within a 40-mile radius. Ranchers, loggers, miners from the old copper operation up north. Nearest hospital is 60 miles away, in White Peak, so we're essential services here. Open 24 hours, though only on call after 9 at night. You'll stay in the apartment upstairs. The tour was perfunctory and oddly selective. Conrad pointed out inventory systems, storage protocols, and a surprisingly modern computer system, all standard, except for certain areas he hurried past with vague explanations. A locked cabinet of amber bottles was specialty compounds. A bookshelf of ancient medical texts was reference materials, rarely needed. The basement door was storage, nothing interesting. Most concerning was the refrigerator unit, a modern stainless steel commercial model that seemed out of place among the antique furnishings. Conrad merely pointed at it, saying, "Standard cold storage, vaccines, insulin, biologics," before quickly moving on. As they climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, Elise noticed more symbols carved into the banister and along the wall, similar to those downstairs but more elaborate, with additional markings that almost resembled script. The apartment was unexpectedly spacious. A full one-bedroom with a small living area, kitchenette, and surprisingly modern bathroom. Windows looked out over the town in front and dense forest behind the building. The furniture was old but well maintained, giving the space a cozy, if somewhat dated atmosphere. Previous pharmacist left 6 months ago, Conrad explained. Family emergency back east, never returned. What happened to their belongings? Elise asked, noting the apartment's impersonal emptiness. Conrad's expression remained neutral. Nothing worth keeping. Utilities included in your compensation package, laundry facilities in the back room downstairs. Any questions? Dozens actually, but Elise settled on the most pressing. How soon would you like me to start? Tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp. They descended back to the main floor, where Conrad reached beneath the counter and produced a yellowed envelope, sealed with wax bearing an impression of what appeared to be a stylized mountain range. Last thing, he said, sliding it toward her, the protocols. Protocols? Elise accepted the envelope, noting its weight and the strange waxy texture of the aged paper. Rules, Conrad clarified, his expression grave. The fluorescent lighting overhead made the hollows of his cheeks more pronounced, giving him an almost skull-like appearance. You don't have to understand them, you just have to follow them, for your own safety. With a mixture of curiosity and professional skepticism, Elise broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside were several typewritten pages. The ink faded with age, corners yellowed and brittle. The header read, Beartooth Pharmacy, operational protocols, followed by a date from nearly 50 years earlier. Elise skimmed the first page, eyebrows rising with each line. Wait. Never unlock the medicine fridge after 11:30 p.m. If someone asks for blue ash, deny it exists even if it's in stock. What is this? Conrad's face remained impassive, watching her reaction with those pale blue eyes that never seemed to blink quite often enough. Some might seem peculiar, but they're non-negotiable. This can't be legal, Elise continued reading, medical training and professional ethics, immediately raising red flags. Every Thursday at 3:06 p.m, set a chair facing aisle 3. Leave it there until sunrise. If you hear heavy breathing from the vitamin section, do not investigate. Turn off the lights and wait. Her eyes widened at the next one. Do not speak to customers with bandaged eyes. Ring them up in silence. Conrad, this is absurd. We can't discriminate against visually impaired customers. Legal concerns aren't relevant here, Conrad interrupted quietly, a hint of steel beneath his soft tone. These are traditions, practices specific to Beartooth. They predate modern pharmacy regulations. But why? They predate me as well, Conrad continued, gently taking the protocol list and flipping to the final page. There, a line of signatures stretched down the margin, each with a date beside it. The earliest was from 1873, the most recent Conrad's own, dated 27 years ago. Every pharmacist who has served here has followed these protocols, without exception. Elise studied the signature page with growing unease. Some of the names had strange symbols drawn beside them rather than traditional dates. You can't seriously expect me to follow instructions about not speaking to certain customers or setting up chairs at specific times. It's unethical and frankly bizarre. Conrad's expression softened slightly. I understand your reaction. I felt the same when first presented with these protocols. You've come from a world of evidence-based practice, randomized controlled trials, and pharmaceutical algorithms. This must seem like superstitious nonsense. He took the protocols and carefully refolded them into the envelope. Take tonight to review them. By morning, you can decide whether Beartooth is the right placement for you. If not, I'll arrange transportation back to White Peak. No hard feelings. That was surprisingly reasonable, and Elise felt some of her tension ease. And if I choose to stay? Then you agree to follow the protocols, all of them, without question or exception. Conrad's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, because those who don't, Dr. Kettering, tend not to remain in Pine Bend for very long. But why? Those who ask too many questions don't last long in Pine Bend. Conrad's voice remained gentle, despite the warning. Review them tonight. Tomorrow's your first full day. As Elise climbed the creaking stairs to her new apartment that evening, the weight of the rule pages felt heavier than paper should. She placed them on her nightstand and unpacked her meager belongings, setting her pharmacy diploma beside a photo of her parents. The apartment was sparsely furnished, but clean. A bed, dresser, small kitchenette, and bathroom. The windows offered a view of the dark forest pressing against the back of the building. Under the glow of a bedside lamp, Elise read through the rules again. Never unlock the medicine fridge after 11:30 p.m. No exceptions. If someone asks for blue ash, deny it exists, even if it's in stock. Every Thursday at 3:06 p.m, set a chair facing aisle 3. Leave it there until sunrise. If you hear heavy breathing from the vitamin section, do not investigate. Turn off the lights and wait. Do not speak to customers with bandaged eyes. Ring them up in silence. Once a month, place an unlabeled pill bottle at the edge of the woods, behind the store. Do not look back. If the bell above the door rings but no one enters, lock the store immediately. Wait in the basement. Never turn off all the lights simultaneously after sunset. If the phone rings exactly 4 times, do not answer. If it rings 5 or more times, answer but say nothing. Don't look directly at customers who entered between 2:47 a.m. and 3:12 a.m. Elise closed the document, torn between amusement and unease. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as small-town superstition, maybe even an elaborate hazing ritual for newcomers, but Conrad's grave demeanour suggested otherwise. "Well," she whispered to the empty room, "at least it won't be boring." Elise's first week at Beartooth Pharmacy passed with surprising normalcy. Conrad worked alongside her, showing her the computerized inventory system that seemed decades newer than everything else in the building. Regular customers came and went, mostly elderly residents refilling prescriptions and ranchers picking up veterinary supplies. Conrad followed the rules with clockwork precision. On Thursday at exactly 3:06 p.m, he placed a wooden chair in aisle 3, facing a shelf of cold medicines. When Elise questioned it, he simply tapped the list she now kept in her pocket. Sheriff Tom Gillis became a familiar face, stopping by for his blood pressure medication. Tall and silver-haired, with an easy smile, he seemed out of place against Pine Bend's general atmosphere of discomfort. "How's our new pharmacist settling in?" he asked on Friday, leaning against the counter while Elise filled his prescription. "Still getting used to things," she replied. "Some aspects of the job unexpected." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. Mountain towns have their own rhythms. Best to keep to them. "The rules, you mean?" Sheriff Gillis's smile dimmed slightly. Conrad's shared those already. "Good. They matter more than you might think." He glanced at his watch. "Hour before sunset. I should get going. Don't like being out after dark myself." That night, Elise experienced her first rule in action. At 9:45, as she prepared to close, the phone rang exactly 4 times before falling silent. Conrad, who had been restocking shelves, immediately stopped and watched the phone, his body tense until a minute had passed. "What would have happened if I'd answered?" Elise asked. Conrad resumed shelving. "Nothing you'd want to experience." At 11:25, Conrad checked his watch and abruptly locked the medicine refrigerator. "Never unlock it after 11:30, he reminded her. "What if there's an emergency? A child needs antibiotics." "We have a separate supply for emergencies." Conrad pointed to a small cooler behind the counter. "That one's safe. The main refrigerator isn't. Not after hours." Just before closing, Elise heard it. Heavy breathing from the vitamin section, just as the rules had warned. Conrad immediately turned off the main lights, leaving only the emergency exit signs glowing red. "Don't move," he whispered, eyes fixed on the dark aisle. "Don't speak." The breathing grew louder, accompanied by soft shuffling noises. Something moved through the darkness, a shadow darker than the surrounding gloom. Elise felt her skin prickle with gooseflesh as it passed, near enough that she could smell something like wet soil and copper. After 10 minutes of complete stillness, Conrad quietly turned the lights back on. The pharmacy was empty. "What was that?" Elise whispered. "One of the reasons we have rules," Conrad replied. The following Wednesday, Elise broke her first rule. An elderly man entered the pharmacy at dusk, his eyes covered with gauze bandages, using a white cane to navigate. According to Rule 5, Elise should remain silent while serving him, but when the man reached the counter, he seemed confused and frightened. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling. "Is anyone there? I need help." Conrad was in the back room. Against her better judgment, Elise spoke. "I'm here, sir. How can I help you?" The old man went perfectly still. Then, slowly, his lips stretched into a smile that extended too wide for a human face. "You spoke to me," he whispered, head tilting at an unnatural angle. "How kind." Elise felt her blood turn to ice as the man's bandages began to darken with something that wasn't blood. A black, viscous fluid that dripped onto the counter. "I need to get Mr. Blithe," she managed to say, backing away. "No need for Conrad," the man replied, still smiling that impossible smile. "We're just getting acquainted." The lights flickered. When they stabilized, the man was gone. In his place sat a small amber bottle, labeled only with a symbol Elise didn't recognize. Conrad emerged from the back room, face ashen. "What happened? What did you do?" "There was a man with bandaged eyes. I spoke to him." Conrad closed his eyes briefly. "You broke Rule 5. He looked around the pharmacy, noting the amber bottle. "They've marked you now. It begins..." That night, Elise dreamed of forests thicker and older than any she'd seen, of roots that coiled like fingers beneath the earth, and of something vast watching her from between ancient trees. She awoke to find her bedsheets damp with black residue that evaporated when exposed to sunlight. "You've been marked," said Mara Jensen the next morning. The woman had appeared at the pharmacy as soon as it opened, making a beeline for Elise. "Excuse me?" Elise asked, trying to place the stranger. "You broke one of the protocols." Mara was in her 40s with long, grey-streaked hair and clothes that smelled of herbs and smoke. "I'm Mara, local herbalist, and you need protection." Conrad surprisingly nodded at Mara's words. "She can help. Trust her." Mara placed a small cloth pouch on the counter. "Wear this. It won't stop them, but it'll slow their interest." "Stop who? What interest?" Elise demanded. "The old ones," Mara replied. "Those who made the agreements with the founders. They're curious about you now." "What agreements?" Mara glanced at Conrad, who shook his head slightly. "Not here," she said. "Visit my cabin when you're ready to know more. But before they come looking..." After Mara left, Elise confronted Conrad. "You know this is insane, right? Old agreements, being marked." Conrad stared at her with hollow eyes. "Insanity would be ignoring the evidence of your own experience. Did you, or did you not, see something impossible yesterday?" Elise couldn't deny it. The man's unnatural smile, the black fluid, his disappearance. None could be explained rationally. "What is this place?" she whispered. "A pharmacy," Conrad answered simply, "and something more, a boundary, a meeting point." That afternoon, Elise noticed the first changes. Prescriptions rearranged themselves when she wasn't looking. Temperature dropped precipitously near certain shelves. A dark stain appeared behind the counter, seeping upward against gravity. By evening, she was seeing him, the tall man. Always in peripheral vision, standing impossibly thin and motionless, in reflective surfaces, never directly visible, always vanishing when she turned to look, just a silhouette of abnormal proportions watching. That weekend, Elise hiked into the forest, following Mara's directions. The herbalist's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by a circle of white stones. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the scent of drying herbs hung in the air. "You've held out longer than most," Mara said, opening the door before Elise could knock. "The marked ones usually come running the first night." Inside the cabin was a single room filled with hanging plants, jars of preserved specimens, and books stacked to the ceiling. A fire crackled in the hearth, and above it hung a map of Pine Bend, with strange symbols marked at various points. "You called them the Old Ones," Elise said, accepting a cup of bitter tea. "What are they?" "Names have power here, so we don't use them," Mara replied. "They were here before us, before anything with a spine walked these mountains. They slept mostly until settlers arrived." "And what, made a deal with them?" Mara nodded. "The town's founders discovered what lived in these forests when half their children disappeared in one night. They made offerings, established boundaries, created rules of interaction." Elise stared into her tea. "That's what the pharmacy is, a boundary." "A seal," Mara corrected. "One of 7 in town. The pharmacy is the strongest because it provides what they need most. Compounds that keep them dormant. The rules maintain the balance." "And Conrad?" "A guardian like those before him, like you're meant to be." Elise nearly dropped her cup. "What? No, I took this job to escape, to start over. Not to become part of some supernatural pact." Mara's expression softened. Yet here you are. They don't choose randomly, Elise. Conrad recognized something in you. The capacity to understand, to adapt, to believe. I don't want this. Few ever do, Mara said gently. But consider the alternative. The agreements keep this town safe. When rules break, boundaries weaken. Without guardians, everything falls apart. Before leaving, Elise studied the map above Mara's fireplace. 7 locations were marked with different symbols. The pharmacy, the sheriff's office, the church, the diner, the old mill, the library, and an unmarked building at the edge of town. 7 seals, Mara confirmed, following her gaze. 7 guardians. 7 sets of rules. And if they break, Mara's voice dropped to a whisper, the forest reclaims everything. The next morning, Conrad collapsed while inventorying medications. Elise called an ambulance, and within 30 minutes they were at Pine Bend's small medical clinic, hardly more than an outpost staffed by a single doctor. Dr. Whitaker took her aside after examining Conrad. It's advanced pancreatic cancer, he's known for months. But he never said anything, Elise protested. Conrad's private that way. Says he's been training his replacement. Dr. Whitaker gave her a questioning look. That would be you, I gather. While Conrad slept, Elise searched his personal belongings looking for answers. In his wallet, she found a folded paper, another list of rules but older, the handwriting different from Conrad's. A nurse entered, startling her. He's awake, asking for you. Conrad looked frailer against the white hospital sheets, his skin nearly translucent. When he spoke, his voice was raspier than usual. I've been selfish, he said as Elise took the chair beside his bed. Should have prepared you better. You knew you were sick all this time. He nodded weakly. Terminal. Doc gave me 6 months last December. Held on this long to find the right successor. And you decided that was me, without asking? The position chooses as much as I do, Conrad replied. I've interviewed 27 pharmacists over the past year. Only you sensed it. Sensed what? The liminality, the boundary nature of Beartooth. Conrad's eyes drifted to the window, where forest stretched to the horizon. They recognized you immediately. That's unusual. Promising. The rules, Elise said. I found another set in your wallet. Different handwriting. Conrad smiled faintly. My predecessors, Elizabeth Holloway. She served for 31 years before me. I've served 27. How far back does this go? The first guardian was appointed in 1873. There's a complete record in the basement archive. 23 guardians in total. Elise leaned closer. And what happens when you're gone? If I refuse? Conrad's expression darkened. They'll select someone. But without proper training, improper transitions occur. Boundary integrity fails. He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. Last time that happened was 1916. The town's population dropped from 762 to 147 in a single night. Why me? Elise whispered. Because you've seen death before, Conrad answered, his eyes knowing. The accident wasn't your fault, Elise, but it taught you about boundaries between life and death, responsibility and fate. His grip loosened. Also, you have no family to miss you, no ties to prevent you from staying. Elise pulled away, stung by the accuracy of his assessment. I need time to think. There isn't much, Conrad warned. I've lasted longer than expected, but when I go, the transition begins. 3 days max before the boundary weakens irreparably. That evening, Conrad insisted on returning to the pharmacy, despite the doctor's protests. Some rules can't be delegated, he explained to Elise as she helped him up the steps. One such rule was the monthly placement of an unlabeled pill bottle at the forest's edge. According to the calendar Conrad kept, tonight was the night. I'll do it, Elise offered, seeing Conrad's weakened state. He nodded gratefully. Remember Rule 6, place it at the edge of the woods, behind the store, do not look back. The pill bottle was already prepared, amber glass filled with white tablets that Conrad refused to identify. At exactly midnight, Elise took it outside to where the pavement gave way to underbrush and towering pines. She placed the bottle on a flat rock that seemed deliberately positioned at the forest boundary. As she turned to leave, curiosity overcame her. Despite the rule's warning, she slipped behind a dumpster to watch. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the ground around the bottle. The trees nearest the rock began to sway despite the absence of wind. Something moved within the forest, a presence more sensed than seen. The underbrush parted as though pressed down by invisible feet. The bottle trembled, then lifted into the air, hovering momentarily before disappearing into the darkness between trees. Elise pressed herself against the dumpster, heart hammering. As she watched, a figure emerged partially from the forest. The tall man she'd glimpsed in reflections. In physical form, he was even more wrong. Limbs too long and jointed, in impossible places, skin like bark stretched over bone, face a blank, vertical oval. He turned toward her hiding place, though he had no visible eyes. One elongated arm extended, finger pointing directly at her. "Guardian-to-be," came a voice like rustling leaves. "You break another rule." Elise couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The tall man took one step forward, halfway out of the forest now. "Your predecessor weakens, the boundary thins. Soon we will meet properly." Then he stepped backwards, melting into shadow. The forest returned to normal, though the frost remained. Elise fled back into the pharmacy, locking the door behind her. Conrad waited behind the counter, face grim. "You looked back," he stated flatly. "I saw him. The tall man." Elise struggled to calm her breathing. "He spoke to me." Conrad's eyes widened. "That's unprecedented. What did he say?" "That we'd meet properly soon, that the boundary is thinning." Conrad nodded slowly. "My time grows shorter than I thought." The following day brought escalating strangeness. Time distorted inside the pharmacy, clocks running backward for minutes at a time, moments repeating like skipped records. Customers entered and exited without seeming to notice, though some gave Elise pitying looks. In the prescription records, Elise discovered names of previous employees dating back decades, all listed with the same termination reason: transfer to Forest Service. At 10:55 that night, as Conrad rested in the back office, the emergency line rang. A panicked mother reported her 6-year-old with a severe allergic reaction. They lived 20 minutes away. By the time they arrived, it would be after 11:30. "The epinephrine is in the main refrigerator," Conrad called weakly from the office. "Remember Rule 1. Elise checked the emergency cooler, but its epinephrine supply was depleted. As the minutes ticked toward 11:30, she made her decision. At 11:32, she unlocked the refrigerator. The medications inside had transformed into black sludge that pulsed like a heartbeat. Strange symbols appeared on the refrigerator walls, glowing with sickly green light. When Elise slammed the door shut, the damage was done. The sludge seeped under the door, spreading across the floor in intricate patterns. Conrad appeared, leaning heavily on a cane. "What have you done?" Before Elise could answer, the bell above the door jangled. The desperate mother rushed in, carrying a small boy whose face was swollen, nearly beyond recognition. Working quickly, Elise administered epinephrine from a backup supply Conrad produced from his coat pocket. As the child's breathing eased, the black sludge retreated, coursing back towards the refrigerator. "You saved him," the mother sobbed, clutching her son. "Yes," Conrad said quietly after they left, "at a cost." The symbols remained, etched permanently into the floor and walls. That night, Elise dreamed of trees uprooting themselves, of something vast stirring beneath the mountain, and of 7 seals breaking simultaneously. The end began on Thursday of Elise's 3rd week in Pine Bend. Conrad, now bedridden in his apartment above the pharmacy, called Elise to his side. His skin had a grey translucency, and his breathing came in shallow gasps. "It's time," he whispered. "The Guardian's transference." "I haven't agreed," Elise protested, though her resistance had weakened with each inexplicable event. "Your agreement matters less than theirs," Conrad replied. "Since you broke the rules, they've been watching you, testing you. The choice was made when you saved that child, despite knowing the consequences." He reached for a wooden box beside his bed, opening it to reveal an ancient key and a vial of dark liquid. "Tonight you'll need to perform the renewal ritual in the basement. Sheriff Gillis will assist. He's the guardian of the second seal." Conrad pressed the key into her palm. "Once I'm gone, you have 3 days to complete it. After that, the boundary fails." By sunset, Conrad Blithe was dead. Sheriff Gillis arrived as Elise covered Conrad's body. "I felt it," he said simply. "The shift." "I don't understand any of this," Elise admitted. "You don't have to understand. You just have to follow the protocols." The sheriff's words echoed Conrad's from her first day. "For all our safety." As night fell, reality began unraveling around them. The phone rang continuously, in patterns of 4, then 7, then 12 rings. The vitamin aisle filled with heavy breathing from multiple unseen sources. The chair that had been placed at 3:06 p.m. vibrated across the floor of its own accord. At midnight, multiple rules broke simultaneously. The bell jangled, though no one entered. The lights flickered on and off without being touched. Black sludge seeped from beneath closed doors. "We need to begin," Sheriff Gillis urged, using Conrad's key to unlock the basement door, "before they breach completely." The basement was larger than physically possible, given the building's dimensions. Row upon row of archives stretched into darkness, and at the center stood a stone altar covered in the same symbols Elise had seen on the refrigerator. "The pharmacy isn't just a pharmacy," Sheriff Gillis explained, lighting ancient candles around the altar. "It's built on the original meeting place where the first contact occurred, where the first agreement was struck." From upstairs came the sound of shattering glass. The floor shook as something heavy moved through the pharmacy. "They're coming through," Gillis warned. "The boundary's failing faster than expected." Mara Jensen appeared from between the archive shelves, carrying herbs and bones. "I've brought the others," she announced, as 4 more townspeople emerged from the shadows, solemn-faced men and women Elise recognized as owners of the diner, church, library, and mill. "The 7 guardians," Elise realized. "6 now," Mara corrected, "until you accept the role." The ritual began with each guardian taking position around the altar. They cut their palms, letting blood drip onto the stone while chanting words in a language Elise didn't recognize. The basement temperature plummeted as the candles flared, unnaturally bright. Above, something massive crashed through the pharmacy. Dust rained from the ceiling. "They sensed the transition," Mara explained, voice tight with fear. "They always test the boundaries during succession." Sheriff Gillis turned to Elise. "It's time. Take your place and repeat the oath." Elise hesitated, thinking of all she'd left behind. A career derailed by tragedy, parents who barely called, an emptiness she'd carried for years. "Why should I?" she asked. "Why perpetuate this?" "Because alternatives are worse," Mara said. "The agreements keep them contained, mostly sleeping. Without guardians, they awaken fully. First, Pine Bend disappears, then surrounding towns. Eventually, cities." The basement door splintered inward. Something pushed through, a tangle of limbs and shadows, with a tall man at the forefront. "Guardian-to-be," he intoned, voice resonating from everywhere and nowhere. "Choose." In that moment, Elise understood. The rules weren't just superstition or tradition. They were a language, a complicated syntax of rituals that maintained equilibrium between worlds. Breaking them wasn't just dangerous, It was like removing words from a binding contract, creating loopholes that could be exploited. She stepped to the altar and cut her palm. "I accept the guardianship," she said, letting blood fall onto the stone. "I will maintain the protocols. I will preserve the boundary." The effect was immediate. The symbols on the altar blazed with blue light that shot upward, through the ceiling. The presence retreated, the pressure in the room equalizing. The tall man bowed slightly before dissolving into shadow. "It is done," Sheriff Gillis sighed, the tension leaving his body. "The boundary is resealed." 5 years later, Dr. Elise Kettering stood behind the counter at Beartooth Pharmacy, watching a nervous young man review his employment paperwork. The pharmacy looked much the same, though Elise had added modern touches. Computerized inventory systems, expanded compounding capabilities, even a small coffee bar for waiting customers. What hadn't changed were the protocols. "Last thing," Elise said, sliding a sealed envelope across the counter. "The rules." The pharmacist, Dr. James Linden, newly graduated and seeking a quieter practice environment, opened it with curious fingers. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief as he read. "Never unlock the medicine fridge after 11:30 p.m. If someone asks for blue ash, deny it exists. What is this?" Elise smiled faintly, remembering her own identical reaction years before. "Protocols specific to Beartooth. You don't have to understand them, you just have to follow them." "For my own safety?" he asked with nervous laughter. "For everyone's." Elise tapped the paper where she'd added her own contribution to the rules. A 24th protocol developed after her experiences. If you see your reflection smile when you are not smiling, cover all mirrors and reflective surfaces immediately. Recite the pharmacy oath 3 times while facing north. Do not look outside until dawn. Through the window, the forest pressed close against the parking lot, ancient and patient. Somewhere within its depths, the tall man waited, honoring the agreement that had kept Pine Bend safe for over a century. James set down the rules, his expression troubled. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all," Elise replied, glancing at the clock. 11:27 p.m. She moved to lock the medicine refrigerator. "Some places have their own rhythms, Dr. Linden. Pine Bend expects us to keep to them." As if on cue, heavy breathing emanated from the vitamin section. Elise calmly reached for the light switch. "Rule 4, she explained to her wide-eyed assistant. "Welcome to Beartooth Pharmacy. Your training begins now."